Welcome, everyone, to the Collective Healing and Indigenous Wisdom panel. My name is Dr. Shamini Jain. I'm the founder and CEO of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have three luminaries carrying out healing in the world in various ways, bridging Indigenous wisdom with social action. I'd like to introduce each of our speakers and panelists, and then we're just going to get into some flow of discussion around the role of Indigenous wisdom in fostering collective healing, especially during these really critical times. So we'll start with Tasreen Khamisa. Tasreen Kamisa is the executive director for the Tasreen Kamisa Foundation, where she served for 22 years. TKF, or the Tasreen Kamisa Foundation, is a San Diego nonprofit with a mission to educate and inspire children in the restorative principles of accountability, compassion, forgiveness, peacemaking, and support for safer schools and community. I want to share with you that in 1995, Tasreen's life was forever changed when her younger brother Tariq, a 20-year-old student at San Diego State University, was murdered during a gang-involved robbery. In an act of deep compassion, her family chose to forgive the 14-year-old assailant, Tony Hicks, who was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Her father, Tasreen's father, Azim Khamisa, saw that there were victims on both ends of the gun. So he began the foundation, TKF, in order to stop youth violence. Tasreen relocated from Seattle in 1998 to join her father in creating this organization, and she's played a pivotal role in the release of Tony Hicks from prison. So Tasreen, we're so thrilled to have you with us. Next, I'd like to introduce Nonty Carity Sabic. Nonty is a South African leader who teaches and advocates for many different issues facing us today, including climate change and social justice, community living, diversity, and North-South healing and reconciliation, utilizing the principles of Ubuntu. She is also a healer. Since 2013, Nonty's been involved with the Global Eco-Village Network, or GEN, where she served as a board member and is still part of the Active Advocacy and Policy Working Group. She's also the co-founder and director of RISE, Revivers of Indigenous Spirituality and Ecosystems, and you may have seen her around on Shift Network and other places where she's been really wonderful in sharing her wisdom of Ubuntu principles and their real-world relevance. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Mr. Vikash Srivastov. Vikas serves as the Director of Mindfulness at Legacy Early College K-12 Charter School in Greenville, South Carolina. This is a school that serves underprivileged youth in South Carolina and is the largest Title I school there. Vikas holds a master's in education from Harvard in education and a BA from UC San Diego in sociology. He currently specializes in integrating mindfulness, nonviolence, creative confidence, and an entrepreneurial mindset in education. He's an active meditation practitioner and teacher in the Vipassana tradition and teaches at retreat centers in the United States. It is such an honor to have each of you with us. Thank you so much for being here. So I thought we could just start with a real basic question for each of you, and let's just see where the dialogue really goes. Currently, we have a lot of crisis around the world, right? Whether we talk about health crisis, climate change crisis, violence crisis, each of you have been involved really for decades in helping to foster healing and drawing from Indigenous wisdom principles to help with that. From your perspective, from each of you, what do you think are some of the most key Indigenous wisdom principles that are really guiding the social action work and inspire you to continue the social activism work that you do? What can we learn from these Indigenous systems? Nanti, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, to be sharing with all of you and learning also from each other. Yeah, so my name is Nonty and I'm from South Africa. And I grew up under the Indigenous knowledge system of Ubuntu. And for me, Ubuntu is the basis, or rather say a container of who I am and how I live my life. And it's a high value of I am because we are. So for me, it's a really strong value that I live by, and also that directs my every action in a sense of, I feel like community is very important. It's something that should be in the center of every human being, the understanding that we are interconnected, not only with other beings, but also with the planet. And I believe that it's this illusion of disconnection that we find ourselves in all these different crises that we are experiencing today, whether it's climate crisis, whether it's racial injustice, all kinds of social injustices. For me, is the root of all is the forgetting that we are interconnected, that we are one with the planet, with each other. So yeah, I think for now, I'm just gonna leave it there.
Thank you, Nanti. That's such a core principle, right? The principle of interdependence. And as you say, the false idea of separation is really what's driving a lot of the problems that we see today, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. It'll be great to explore how things can be different utilizing those principles. Yeah. Vikas, what do you think? What are some core principles of Indigenous wisdom that really play a role in healing, collective healing today?
I think Nanti really set the stage right. She really explained the fundamentals, and that, in my experience, not only in the Indian tradition, in the Vedic tradition, in the Vipassana tradition, and then my, just my limited experience with African traditions as well as Native American tradition, I feel that native wisdom is both whispering and yelling, a reminder of this interconnectedness and this, whether we explicitly say it, as it seems like Nanti sees it as a very explicit and obvious basis of the Ubuntu tradition, or in the Vipassana tradition, it's as we do the practice, we come to the same conclusion through the molecular particle reality, that in reality, we're all molecules, going back and forth, colliding and separating together. So when we have this disintegration, when we see things as separate and isolated, then I think it leads to confusion and illusion and suffering. And we can no longer understand the problem. We see this in medicine. We see this in education. We see this in any kind of modern attempt to take apart a more holistic view. And so I think when we look at healing, if we look at racism, we have to talk about power and economics, any type of discrimination. So again, we cannot isolate the issue. It's not about skin color. If we look at hunger, we have to look at economics. If we look at economics, we have to look at culture and ethnocentrism. If we look at the right hand, we look at the left hand. So all of these things are interconnected. And so, yeah, I agree. I think this interdependency is the basis of what I have seen of the indigenous wisdom, and it's come to a peak. We feel it comes to a peak each moment, right? Each year we see events that are peaking this, and those peaks become more and more harsh as we fight, as we continue to walk in this illusion, this suffering. We can deny it, but the law of nature is that we're all interconnected. The law of nature is that the trees depend on the insects, depend on the earth, the sun, and the wind, and we all depend on each other. This is the law of nature. So Yeah, I'm going to agree with Nanti and say that it is this interdependency.
And I love how you linked the, you know, the sense, literally the felt experience of interdependence with the molecular reality of us being vibrational beings. I mean, I think I heard that in there. So it's the sense that our self, you know, there's something about the sense of self in relationship to interdependence that, you know, I am not simply this physical body that is separate from other bodies. And you know, even for example, in my field, as you all know, you know, in psychoneuroimmunology, we used to think that the brain and the immune system weren't connected. That's just a little example of how, you know, we kept throwing these models of isolation and disconnection onto health, onto science, and what we have a global viral epidemic, right? We have a global climate change epidemic. Everything, I think we're all realizing that every little thing we do affects the so-called other. And in fact, we're not really other, right? We're all one, and we're all experiencing the one through our form. And so we're seeing that reflected. I think what I'm hearing y'all say is that we're if we take that kind of vantage point, then we can better understand where we're at right now. And what are some of the false models, or let's say incomplete models, that have driven us to this place. So thank you for that. Tasreen, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I want to honor and just respect this wisdom and where it comes from with our Indigenous communities. And we've gained, I think, so much knowledge from that. So just to honor Nanti, honor Vikas, honor you, Shamini, everyone in this space. I think that what I've really learned in this process, and maybe what I can add, is that this really is a way of being. This is a mindset that we have to embody, that we are all one, and that we're part of a collective process, and we're part of community. And if we look at each other as brothers and sisters, and we take care of each other as brothers and sisters, and we tap into that unconditional love that we have for humanity, that's where we can really affect change. And I think especially when there is harm, right? Especially when there is crisis, especially when there is challenges, especially when sometimes we make mistakes in this as human beings, right? We make mistakes, and we need to kind of grace those second chances, grace that humanity, and heal. And I think this process and having this lens is a way to healing, which I think is really crucial on this journey. I think this is also hard, lifelong work, and it does start with self. So this is an inside job, and then that once we can show up for ourselves and we can heal our inner wounds, we can show up for others in healthy ways and help heal community.
Thank you. That's so well said. And thank you for naming that. It's one thing to know it up here, and it's another to practice, right? So we can say, oh, all of these traditions had the knowledge of interdependence, connection, and expanded sense of self. But if we're not living it, then we can't be the change, right? And we have to, and Tasreen, what I hear you saying is if we can't be the change here, then it's hard to kind of foster the bigger changes beyond, you know, ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are silenced in this, right? And I think right now you're hearing voices, and people are not wanting to be silenced anymore. And that's crucial. You know, we have to feel safe in our communities and in people we live with, in our families, in our schools. We have to feel safe to not feel like we have to stay quiet in this and suffer, right? Our voices need to be heard. And I think we're seeing that. People are raising their voices because they're tired of being silenced. And this is a time, this is a movement right now, which I have a lot of hope. I feel hopeful right now. And that's a good thing.
Thank you. You know, this discussion is pinging me to ask a question that I hadn't thought of asking before, but I think it's really relevant and will be really relevant to the communities that will be watching this. There's been a lot of discussion, at least in communities that I'm aware of not spiritually bypassing, right? And yet there's also a hunger, I think, in many of us to acknowledge and revere the spiritual in this process. So from each of your points of view, how does spiritual connection and spirit play a role in this transformation that we're being asked, to be part of, to help generate as human beings? What is the role of spirit in this?
I can start. I mean, I think I can mostly like speak from my own personal experiences, and I try to be as transparent as possible because I believe that as a leader in my community, I'm also not immune to any trials and tribulations of this life. And as a Black woman born in South Africa during apartheid times, I am very much having the inner wound of race and internalized oppression that I'm continuously working on. And as a leader doing ancestral work, I bring my ancestors in everything that I do, whom also have, went through this trauma of racism. And I acknowledge that. And I have to say, when Tasreen was saying it's time for speaking up because we are tired of being silent, it's like, for a long time doing this work, it felt like, as you said, Shamin, like spiritual bypassing. It's almost like feeling like we are obliged to continuously say we are one, everything is okay. Yes, it's true, we are one, but there's so many levels to a human being that if we deny the physical level, the mental level, we are not being, at least for me, it felt like I was not being truthful and not being whole, And so I needed to bring the trauma of race into the space because it's not just me as a person of color, but it's also the white people in the space as well, that we need to heal from this and not shy away and not feel shameful about. Because as we heal all these different levels, we also can heal issues of climate crisis, as Vikas said about the economy and the resources. So we need to feel like we can create sacred spaces where we can talk about all our wounds and feel uncomfortable, not just go into that space of saying, hey, everything is okay, we love each other. Yes, of course we love each other, but not everything is okay. And there are steps that we need to take before we can run, we need to crawl. But in this container of knowing, of never forgetting that we are interconnected, in this container of knowing, yes, we are one, yet some things did happen that we forgot that we are one, and we need to talk about those things, and we need to heal those wounds, and we need to be uncomfortable, and we need to face that pain, and we need to heal that trauma. Otherwise, it's not truth. At least it's not truth for me. And I think we're really in the time that I never in my life, I didn't think I would experience it in my lifetime. What's happening, it's almost like a spiritual, a mental, and a physical revolution is happening out there. So what is not truth is like falling apart.
Yes.
And we need to learn to just bring truth again into ourselves and into our communities.
Thank you, Nanti. So well said. Yeah, when you're speaking, it reminds me too of when you talk about cultivating safe space and speaking truth, right? Speaking truth as part of that spiritual process. I'm reminded of a practice that I'm just discovered and I'd love to learn more about, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from the Aboriginal tradition in Australia called Dadiri. And it's really the cultivation of deep listening, and sometimes described as deep listening to nature, but also used as a restorative practice of deep listening. And from my personal experience, I would say this is what spiritual support gives me, is the ability to kind of come out of my own, sort of limited, conditioned mind and hold space, as healing practitioners, therapists, or whatever, we learn how to do that, but then to be able to hold space and listen to how someone has felt wronged, the causes and consequences of actions, so that that sacred space can really be held and heard. It just strikes me as, again, this is something that Indigenous wisdom has been teaching us, because spirit is listening as well as us, right? So we can engage in that process and ask for spiritual support to create sacred space when we need it. What do you think, Tasreen and Vikas? What's coming to you?
I think what's coming to me is, I think, how I was raised. And I think we have to kind of go in that space of how spirituality was introduced to us and in our lives. And for me, that was really with my father, Azim Kamisa, who founded the Tasrin Kamisa Foundation, but he kind of coined this term, your cellular space. And that's coming up for me a lot in this, is that how do we tap into our own essence? How do we evolve our souls? I think I've always been taught at a really young age that we're here on this earth for 3 reasons. You know, one is to grow, one is to teach, and one is to serve. And so it's just that that's why we're here. And our soul growth is so crucial. And that piece of tapping into our essence. And if we think about tapping into our essence in kind of a restorative space, that's where we know right from wrong, right? That's where we can tap into doing things bigger than ourselves. That's where we can tap into unconditional love and human dignity. And I think all of this stems from that. And if we can teach that to our children at an early age to tap into that space inside themselves, it will foster, I think, naturally more empathy, more compassion, more understanding, and us seeing each other in that collective space, and helping each other learn and grow. And so when I think of this work, I really go back to that space in me of having to learn to be quiet. So many of these practices, like Vikas is doing and is transforming people, is because we have to learn to be quiet. We have to learn to listen, and we have to gain from that inner wisdom. And so that's coming up a lot for me in this conversation.
Thank
You know, I think if we pull together this concept of interdependency and things are much larger than us and all these systems are interconnected, and the disease is the disintegration, the separateness, the isolation, whether it's in perspective and action or lifestyle. So I think then when we do this work and as we walk this path, it becomes so obvious that things are interconnected and so much larger than us. And it becomes so obvious that the disease is in fact that disconnect from the things beyond us and larger than us. So when we do the work, we have to, and we intuitively tap into those sources that are beyond us. Because we're talking about an interdependency. So how can the solution, how can the work come from me alone? It has to come from something beyond me, because that's the disease, that's the cure. In hearing, in hearing Nanty and Tasreen speak and Shamini, seeing you kind of highlight the points, a couple of things come to mind. One is entitlement. So when we go to entitlement is based on singularity. We can't feel entitled until we call something mine. If it's not mine, there's no entitlement. So if it's not my country, there's no entitlement to the country. If it's not my body, there's no entitlement to the body. And so part of the disease is this idea of entitlement. And so even as we're talking about social and economic, political, cultural, historical equity, yes, there's a certain level of equity that needs to be had for people to survive and thrive. But at the same time, this sense of entitlement is the disease. And so what we're really asking for is equanimity amongst all living beings. And if the struggle is going to lead to another hierarchy, whether, we misinterpret what it means to have a woman-led culture, right? It's not to say that that's wrong, but if we truly understand what that means, and so the woman-led culture is to bring balance to the imbalance, right? It's not that people of color need to now set up a different hierarchy in which white people are at the bottom. It's to balance the imbalance. And lastly, I think, the indigenous cultures, our path as teachers was not, at least for me, and I know Tasreen quite well, I've worked with the foundation for a while, and I know her father quite well. This opportunity to teach and to lead and to do the work is not an aspiration or an ambition. It's something that called us, and it's almost something that the people called from us. And so in this indigenous traditions, you do the work, and as a result of who you become and what you demonstrate, either via skill set or even maybe age or both, then you walk this path. And it's never really an ambition. I mean, you could call it a curse and a blessing. And so this modern ambition is what leads to the spiritual bypass, because people want to feel that they are something they are not through a certification process, right? So now we have kind of this idea that after 3 days or 3 months or 3 years that we do the work. Well, the work will come to you when you're ready to do the work. And again, that's an act of spirit and something larger than us that brings those opportunities to us. And so I think at the root of this spiritual bypassing is almost an entitlement that you feel that if you do the work, you should receive a certain recognition of that work. And I can say amongst the 4 of us, there's no need for recognition. We're not there. It's really a service-oriented path, and it's a path that requires us to continue to do the work and to be at the bottom as a student, even as some people may regard us as teachers or mentors. We're constantly reminded that we're really students on the path.
Thank you for that, Vikas. It reminds me of, many of the sadhus and sadhvis that I've had the pleasure of connecting with. Some of them have been acharyas of the Jain tradition, which means, they're held in very, very high regard. They're basically the stewards of the entire, spiritual tradition. And every time I've met with them, even as a young child, the first thing out of their mouths was, just this beautiful curiosity. And it wasn't even necessarily childlike curiosity, but this curiosity of, you're the teacher and I'm the student. I can't wait to learn from you. And it's genuine. It's not just sort of a put on, it's very much, they're coming from a place of that wonder, that discovery, that understanding that everything and everyone we encounter has something to teach us. So, and that is very different from an entitled point of view, where we think we are at a certain point in the hierarchy and we're trying to move this way and that. It's a completely different system. Well, thank you. This is amazing. And I know that also each of you are doing amazing work. And, one of the questions that often comes up for people that are sort of more on the outside, potentially looking in on some of the spiritual traditions, the healing, communities and all is, how do we help people understand that there's a real link here between inner spiritual development and outer service? And so in that way, I would love for each of you to just share a little bit about how are you taking these principles, these actions, and your own inner knowledge and inner transformation out into the world? And what are some of the things you're seeing as you implement some of these spiritual principles, for collective healing today?
To clarify, is the question, how is our professional work or our community service, the work outside of us, impacting our personal path? Or is it just how are we
It's more how you're bringing it out to your work, I'd say. So how is your own inner development and your adoption of these principles and your understanding of these principles, how are you utilizing those in your service work that you're doing?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start since I'm unmuted. So as I was doing the work here, one of the things was that to create a school of mindfulness, a school that integrates the mindful culture. And now we've actually extended that umbrella to include restorative practice, trauma-sensitive classroom, and social emotional literacy. But for sake of the discussion and simplicity, I'm just going to use the word mindfulness. As I started this journey to create an entire school of mindfulness, and this wasn't the first time, I had failed many times before, we could not create a mandate. We could not require anyone to do anything, because to require someone to do something is not being mindful. And so you're really set up with a riddle as to how to create a cohesive culture when you don't require people to do things. And in the community I'm in, not only it being more towards low income, but also being in South Carolina, where these concepts of mindfulness are not as popular and well known. So people don't know what I'm doing. And yet I have to ask for them to ask me to do what they don't know I'm doing. So I literally would walk the halls and practice mindful walking during every passing period. And it's kind of this idea of like begging with a begging bowl with your eyes closed and receiving whatever someone puts in that bowl. And as people noticed me, they just started asking, you know, what do you do? And I would say, well, let me do this, let me do that. Give me most challenging student. And we would do it. And out of this work came a fourfold framework that is based in the fundamentals of Vipassana, but we can call it mindfulness because Americans have a hard time doing anything with an Indian name, and it becomes ethnocentric. So we have to call Vipassana mindfulness. So call it what you want. But the roots, the foundationals are in what we call mental objectivity. And that's really having a non-dualistic perspective. Understanding that intensity and reactions are a proportionate distance from the reality that is. So mental objectivity, physical embodiment, that true education happens in the body, that we have to experience something to truly understand it. And so we can talk about theory, but if we don't meditate and are able to see our own emotions without reacting to them, then how can we see others' emotions without reacting to it? What does it feel like to experience the tension of I want to react, but I won't react? What does it feel like in my body? So mental objectivity, physical embodiment, emotional resilience, understanding that life is, for the most part, impersonal, right? It's impersonal. Death is impersonal. Sickness is impersonal. Misunderstanding is impersonal. Racism is impersonal. So that develops a resilience. And then the last piece is expanded awareness, which is understanding that everything can be reduced down to smaller parts, all the way down to molecules. And once we reduce it down to the smaller parts, we realize that everything is actually interconnected, and that consciousness and being is not limited to the physical constructs of our bodies, because at the molecular level, those molecules are existing well beyond our physical understanding. And so mental objectivity, physical embodiment, emotional resilience, and expanded awareness are fundamental aspects of Vipassana. There's more than that, but I think it's important as we do this work to limit ourselves to some kind of core theories so that we can really focus in on them. So I chose those four, and what came to me through spirit was to align those to the Lakota medicine wheel. Which begins on the four directions, and the east is the mental, the south is the physical, the west is the emotional, and the north is the spiritual. And we always begin in the east, and then we kind of go through that cycle from east, south, west, and north. And so when I teach and when I develop my programs, I actually always begin with the theory, then we practice it, give time for reflection, and then I turn expanded awareness into integration. How do we integrate that? And just very quickly, because I definitely want to hear from Nanti and Tasreen, part of a pivotal part in the work was differentiating between the practice and the integration. And I bring this up because after this video, we all hear really great ideas. And it's important as workers and healers that we understand that hearing an idea doesn't allow us to integrate it. We all know we should be calm. We all know we shouldn't react. We all know we shouldn't discriminate. However, if we don't have a safe space to practice it and feel what that successful execution feels like in our body, we can't integrate it in the world. And so for Vipassana, that practice comes down to meditation. Everything is about really meditating in a room. Windows are closed, lights are closed, it's quiet. I know I'm going to be able to act without reacting for at least whatever time period I'm sitting in that room, away from anyone who can hurt me. And then when I go out into the world, if I just take that idea into the world, Brother V or Vikas is saying, be calm, don't react. I go into the world and someone cuts me off with their car, or my mother, reminds me of all the things I haven't done or become in my life. All of a sudden I react. It's like, what happened? But that idea of staying calm was so good. Well, we didn't practice it. So I really want to emphasize especially going back to that indigenous wisdom of walking your talk. Please practice. We must practice. Even Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, when they led the nonviolent protest, they practiced what it meant to be nonviolent. Like, let us practice. They practiced, they worked out, they held fast. Okay, when we go to jail, we may not eat. What does that feel like? Let us practice. So if you're going to run that 1 mile race, you got to practice 3 miles to run the 1 mile race, but make sure you practice, because when we hit the world often works against us. So practice on your own terms, feel what success feels like, and then take that integration into the world.
Thank you. So much there. And I love your framework and the way that you have connected frameworks of indigenous wisdom with the practice that you do. And it's clear what I'm hearing from you, Vikas, is one of the key things in carrying out that work in the world. And I know, I wish we had more time, because I know you've got lots of amazing stories of how you're actually working with this framework with children, which is phenomenal. In the end, it is about practice and embodiment and the presence, right, that you carry in order to carry out the work. People come to you because of the practice that you have and the presence that you can carry in. So you're really, as Tasreen was saying before, we're walking our talk, right? So thank you for that. Ladies, what are your thoughts on this? How do you see the principles that you carry within yourself and that you are so aligned with showing up in the work that you do?
I can go. Just to, touch on what Vikas just said, it's that practice piece is so crucial. I've really resonated with me. And I think we talk about always building those muscles, building our resiliency muscles and building our forgiveness muscles. And we do that. We have to practice it every day. I mean, this is life work. This is daily life work. And I think the work that we do, it's very, it takes time and it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And so that practice piece, I really resonated with me. So thank you for that. At TKF, we really work with schools. Our work is really rooted in changing culture and climate in schools. And all of our work is really around how do we embody being restorative? How do we shift it and that be a mindset of how we engage with each other, how students engage with each other, how administrators engage with teachers, and how do we really take the principles of being restorative to really strengthen relationships in schools. And we use our story, I think, as a way to open the hearts and minds of people we work with. Our story is very rooted in restorative justice and forgiveness. And I think when you have the two working together, the forgiveness piece is really where healing can start. You can start doing some deep healing. And like Shamini said, my brother Tharik was murdered by a 14-year-old boy named Tony Hicks 25 years ago. And my father saw victims at both ends of the gun, and he felt that America lost 2 sons that night. And if we think about it in that way, that we lost 2 of our sons that night, one to the grave, Tharik, and Tony to the criminal justice system at 14 years old, that was a big loss for community. And in our case, this was not dealt in a restorative way. This was taken over by the criminal justice system. The victims' families were stripped. We had no voice. We were silenced. Tony was silenced as a 14-year-old. That we all know what happens when people come from a lot of trauma and a lot of harm, and they make a mistake. What we do to our young people is we lock them up. We turn our backs on them. And we didn't feel that was the right path, right? And so my father felt like the right path would have been to take a restorative justice approach, where everyone was brought to the table, all parties that were involved were brought to the table, community was brought to the table, and we were able to do things to really make everyone whole and heal everyone. But that didn't happen. So we had to fight for that. We had to fight for that. We had to advocate for that. And what we found is that we supported Tony. You know, he made a mistake. We supported him in his 23 years he served in prison, and we fed him with love and compassion and forgiveness, because we know what we feed, we grow. So if we can do that for people that are sitting in cells and give them hope and build their resiliency and help them to become whole and integrate them back into community and help them serve in meaningful ways, I mean, that's the true spirit of restorative justice. And so, and we did that for Tony, and he's a part of our family. Tony Hicks and Tony's grandfather plus Felix are part of our family. Tony is my soul brother. I call him that. I talk to him more than my own family sometimes, and he's a big part of my life. And he made a mistake, but I've learned I love him. You know, I love him, and he deserves a second chance. And so that really drives our passion to bring that to schools and bring that to classrooms and bring that to teachers. If we can embody this mindset and we can teach our kids and give them the tools they need to navigate their own challenges, heal from their own wounds, support them along the way, and then inspire the adults to learn from the students, because that's truly what happens. I think our young people get this much quicker than the adults do. You really see this beautiful transformation happen in schools, and you see this respect for culture, for race, and you start to hear people talking to each other with love and in ways that restore. And it really inspires, I think, individuals to own what they do, take accountability and responsibility for their actions, and then be a part of the solution to make things right. And that's really, all of our programs are really rooted in that space. And we have, you know, 5 different programs that work from a school level to an individual level, but it's all really rooted in those restorative principles of accountability, compassion, forgiveness, and peacemaking.
Wow, so powerful and so beautiful, Tasreen. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing. I don't think it's very usual for people to, you know, come to that kind of depth of understanding, like true understanding and love that you can feel, right? For, you know, forgive me for saying so if this sounds funny, but, you know, I love my brother's killer, right? I mean, that's how some people would see it. It's like, wow, no, you love Tony. He's a human being who made a huge mistake when he was 14. And the pathways, you know, that you've kind of gone through, and personally, and how you're carrying that out in the world, you know, both you and Azim and everyone at TKF, just, you know, so amazing, so inspiring. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask you, what has Tony's journey been like with this? You know, from his point of view, what has he said about all of this? Where is he in it? Being part of that criminal justice system, receiving love and forgiveness from your family, and his involvement in TKF. What is that like?
His journey has been tough and hard, I think, because he didn't feel that he deserved that forgiveness. He didn't feel that he deserved that second chance. So it took him a long time, I think, to accept it. And the process of forgiving yourself is very hard. It's often easier to forgive others. It's very difficult to forgive yourself. But he had a lot of people surround him and didn't give up on him and kept wanting to show him his beauty, you know, show him his essence, which is beautiful. And for him to see himself as a teacher. And at TKF now, his voice is the strongest voice when we speak to young people. They see themselves in him, and he is this light of hope that you can truly make amends. You can ask for forgiveness, truly make amends, and then serve in ways for the greater good of humanity. How do you serve? How do you take your lived experience? How do you take that for the greater good of humanity? And that's really the journey Tony is on now. He's very spiritual, and he was taught to meditate, which saved him being incarcerated. He read a lot and built his resiliency, and he had hope. He had hope. And I remember at his parole hearing, I said in that space that allow Tony to be accountable to us. Allow him to be accountable back to the community that was harmed in this, and allow him to repair in that space, because that's true healing. And so to see him and to see him in front of kids and to see him speak his truth, like we've all talked about in this space, been a beautiful thing. But it's not been easy. This has not been an easy journey for him. And there's a lot of people that don't think that what we did was the right thing. They can't embrace this. But really, I truly believe this is the way we need to be, especially with our young people, especially with the young people sitting in our classrooms. We can't turn our back on them. We have to elevate them. We have to inspire them. We can't continue to shame and punish people. That has to stop. And that's really like where I'm rooted in, and I'm committed in being that voice for this younger generation, because it is, we look to them. We look to them, we look to them, we learn from them, and we serve for them.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Nanti, what's your perspective? What are the ways you've noticed these principles showing up for you in the work and all of the amazing work that you've been doing over the years?
Yeah, I just want, like, the story that Tasreen has just shared has impacted me a lot, because just a few days ago, I was thinking about, I come from a segregated area in South Africa, because during apartheid, people were divided according to color and also where people could live. And remember, when I was younger, we just had this new freedom. We could go to any schools that we wanted to go if you could pay for it. And a few of us would have to cross the street and go to the suburbs, And after maybe 2 years, some young people couldn't go anymore because of financial problems. And some of them are actually in prison, because of poverty. But just to witness that, to see that these are not bad kids, these are not bad people, nobody's like born bad. It's just the situation and things that happen in your community and the economical structure of where we live, and segregation. And when we really talk about that racism is not just something that happens between individuals, it's a system that is designed to do exactly that, to really oppress people, to disempower people. For me, that story just took me there, because I know young people right now who are in jail who shouldn't be there. And also because we have forgotten Ubuntu. What Tasreen talks about is Ubuntu. When a person in the community or a young person in the community does something that is perceived as wrong or that is hurtful to others, it is a responsibility of the community, because this person is actually a messenger to let us know something has gone wrong in the community, that somehow we had forgotten who we are. We have forgotten to love, embrace, and nurture each other. When a child is born in the community, that child should be nurtured, taken care of, because it takes a village to raise a child. So we are all responsible for each other. So it's not about punishment. It's not about saying that you did wrong, therefore we need to expel you. They say as soon as a man is expelled out of his community, he can only walk a few steps and he falls and he dies, because his very soul knows that he cannot survive out there in the wilderness. So therefore, when things go wrong in the community, it's the community's responsible to rise up and say, hey, what is this person bringing to us? What is the message this person is bringing to us? What has gone wrong? What needs healing in the community? So for me, I think the first thing is that the basis of Ubuntu is, no matter what, no matter how difficult it is, to always come back into compassion and forgiveness and strive really for, this is why I do the North-South healing and reconciliation, because this is the basis of, and I live in Europe, and, sometimes I'm honest about it. Sometimes I have this resistance, like what Vikas was saying, of being an indigenous and doing this work, it's not always like what it's seen like romantic, you know. It has its own difficulties, and it's almost like here I am in Europe sharing the indigenous knowledge of my ancestors with the very people who came to Africa and told us this is evil, this is bad. But this is part of the journey. This is the building of the bridges. This is part of the healing. You know, this is what needs to happen, and it takes time. And so as I work the healing in myself, as I heal the trauma and the ancestral story in myself, I'm also able to sit in a room full of Europeans and say, this is who we are, and this is how we do things in Africa. This is how we did things before you came. You know, this is the pre-colonial, the post-colonial issue. And it's not only my ancestors that need healing, but as we sit in this room, your ancestors as well get the opportunity for healing, and we get to create the space to heal. And this requires, you know, it's not always something that is, I'm like always fully, you know, compassionate and there, but it requires me to constantly say, this is the work, this is what needs to be done, and I need to find compassion. And if it's not there, I really need to go back inside and cultivate it and go out there again and do what needs to be done, because it's not just about me, it's about the future. So for me, it's like really the ancestral teaching and the healing of the past, and for the future ancestors, it's really important. And also ceremonies, because ceremonies also connect with nature. So learning to communicate again with the trees, with the rivers, with the sea, and really respecting and knowing that we shouldn't pollute. You know, we shouldn't be so excessive with buying things and throwing things, you know, just like the small things that I know sometimes are hard to do. But for me is, if we bend down the forest, you know, we're cutting out the lungs, you know, of Mother Earth. We need to respect that. We need to respect the earth that we walk on, because we are earth ourselves. So I'm always continuously like connecting with myself and creating the spaces of healing, and also having also in Europe saying, I want to find community, you know, and being involved with groups of people who are creating intentional communities. This also expands to my work, that I really, really believe in community. But it's not only about intentional community, it's also about creating community where you are. You know, it doesn't matter the address, or it's not just about living. People think you need to go buy land in a rural space, you know, but also people live in cities, and this is where we are. So create community where you are. Find mindfulness, as Vikas says, where you are. You know, it's not about moving physically to go somewhere. So I advocate for this. I always tell people, create community where you are and celebrate your children, you know. Celebrate, remind them who they are, remind them why they are here. And I also struggled with that, and I share that a lot. I struggled with celebrating myself, you know, because, you know, as a Black woman also, the whole world is telling me that I don't belong, you know, everything I see is not the color of my skin. So it's hard for me to be in a constant celebration of myself. And so it's something that I had to learn. And I've reached that point of really celebrating myself and teaching others and holding spaces for people of color, you know, and saying, hey, you're beautiful. You know, I really like it. It's so hard because we were taught that that's not being humble, you know, when you it's like this, I think there's a difference between pride and really just being honoring where you come from and yourself, and being able to tell people of color you're just really beautiful. And this doesn't mean that others are not beautiful. It's just that we've been told we are not beautiful for so long that just know that you're beautiful and you're worthy, and you have something that you bring to this world that is needed, that is wanted. We are beautiful in our diversity, you know. So I yeah, I just had this realization that, yeah, I love my work. It's hard. It's not always easy. Okay. It's not always easy. You know, people have this romantic idea of what a shaman is and what a healer is because, you know, they see you over the weekend workshop.
Yeah, and they put you on a pedestal and they think your life is rosy and you don't have.
And yeah, and you have to keep saying, hey, no, it's not like that. It doesn't work. And at least for me, I don't want it to be like that. You know, it's not an easy journey. But so whatever I go through, I really bring it out there and share with my community. And yeah, let's just respect the earth that we walk on. Let's create community where we are. And I have so many communities that I'm involved in, you know, that I know that they are full of love and support and challenges as well. And also, yeah, just compassion and forgiveness.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm really hearing that. Yeah, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing that with you, Tasreen. It's so many C words that are so powerful that you've expressed, Nanti. Community, compassion, celebration of the children, you know, culture, right? And just to touch upon what you said, you know, around the nature of celebration is so important right now. You know, from my perspective, when we're really celebrating in that way, we're celebrating our collective beauty, our diversity, we're celebrating our culture because we have been held back to be able to fully celebrate that. We've been told that others can celebrate our culture in ways that they see appropriate, but, you know, not necessarily us, right? And what happens, you know, spiritually, I think, during celebration is that what are we connecting with? Again, we're actually connecting with the deeper aspects of consciousness that are bliss, right? Which is so cleansing and healing and truly who we all are, right? That unconditional love, that bliss. And so the celebration, again, you know, is not a bypass. It's not a pride thing. It's not all of that. It's actually, again, connecting with the depths of who we are. Yeah. And wow, I mean, how amazing to be able to witness, you know, cultural celebrations. I always love it. I think many people do. And I think that many in the community are actually asking for that celebration. I was just thinking today, I saw someone post a beautiful video of an Alvin Ailey inspired dance with like 12 or 13 different people just really expressing themselves so fluidly through the body, you know, expressing who they are. In such fluidity. And so while we continue to do the work, as we say, and sometimes the work is very difficult, it's not always easy, it's not always, you know, roses and unicorns or whatever people say, right? That celebration piece is so vital. And as you said, Nanti, the community and bringing community to where we are at every moment, because coming back to our initial conversation, right? We are all one. So loving the ones that we're with, you know, whether it's in a situation that we may consider more of a conflict resolution situation or a celebratory situation, that we don't have to go anywhere, like you said, Nanti. That's so key. I want to thank each of you so much for taking the time to be part of this panel and sharing your wisdom and your practice and the things that you're doing out in the world that are providing hope and collective healing and bringing forth all of these Indigenous wisdom principles that you hold, carry, you know, and are connected to. Before we part, a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you. If they have questions about you or your work, please do share. And also, just in your parting words, any advice that you might have for those that are watching and listening about, you know, a fundamental practice that you would suggest for people during these times to really augment their abilities to heal themselves and be healing lights in the world. Any specific practices that really, you know, resonate with you that you're doing?
I'll jump in. I think, you know, we talk about practice and we're also talking about kind of fundamentals of Indigenous wisdom. And we've mentioned quite a few. One of the things that's really coming to me right now, hearing all of you speak, is that there is a little bit of a difference between the modern way and the Indigenous way. In the Indigenous way, it's very clear that if you want to heal, you have to do the work. There's work to be done. It's not modern medicine where, you know, there's this idea that, you know, somehow people want to be healed without doing the work, a magic pill. And so then we discount the placebo effect, right? And what we're saying is the medicine is the will. The medicine is the desire to heal. That is the beginning of the medicine. We're not saying the other medicine doesn't work, but in these traditions, you have to want to do the work. Tony Hicks has to want to do the work. Tasreen has to want to do the work. Nanti has to want to do the work. You know, we're all coming from stories of struggle, and we wanted to do the work. There was no magic pill here that was given to us. If I give you the practice of meditation, you have to do the work. There's no magic that's going to occur. That being said, my advice is to really understand reality. This is a secular practice. I'm not going to tell you to meditate. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to say understand reality, because suffering is coming from the not understanding reality. So understand reality by looking at nature. Nature does not lie. The TV lies, the internet lies, the history book lies, our elders lie. There's so much, but nature doesn't lie to us. The physical nature does not lie to us. And so I say, come to your senses, come to nature, go experience nature with your eyes and your nose and your ears and your touch and your taste, and understand reality, understand it physically, and then take one piece of it, any one piece of nature, and examine it to the deepest depth possible. If it's a blade of grass, understand the blade of grass. If it's a leaf, understand the leaf. If it's a piece of wood or water, take any element of nature, pick one so that you narrow your focus and examine it deeply. Because to understand the ocean, we don't drain the whole ocean. We take a sample of the water. To understand air quality, we take a sample of the air quality. All you need is a sample of reality, explore it to its depth. And then through your own experience, find your own wisdom, through your own spirits, through your own spirit guides, through your own ancestry, through your own experience, find your wisdom. But anchor it in reality.
Thank you, Vikas. Beautiful. Wisdom through nature and wisdom through commitment. I love it. Tasreen, what are your thoughts? What are the fundamental practices you engage in every day, you know, to help you carry out your work?
I think everything Vikas said, I want to echo. I think to add to that piece is that I think in this work, you know, you can't give what you don't have. So you do have to find those ways where you are quiet and where you can recharge, and how you best recharge, and what that is for you. I think especially of those of us in this field that are, you know, fighting this good fight and working really hard, we tend to give the most and we tend to put ourselves last sometimes. And I think we got to be honest about that, right? And so I think we have to make sure that we take that time to feed ourselves. One thing I do is, I think, and everyone should, and it's kind of rooted in our work, is that, you know, have your mentor, have your person, whether it's your tribe or it's a person, have that person that's your mentor, your safe, soft, emotional landing, someone that has your back in this, because I think feeling supported in this work is very crucial, to feel supported. So that's what I would add.
Thank you, Tasreen. That's so important. Oh, and before I forget, how can people get in touch with you or learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so our website is tkf.org. And so you can go on there, and staff, you can find me on there and read about our work and learn more about what we do in schools. So
Great.
Visit our website. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Nonty, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've already said just like about everything. I totally echo that. I echo silence. find a way to be silent, a way to connect with nature. And if you don't live close to nature, create that space in your home where it's about silence and it's about taking care of yourself, and respecting your boundaries. I think that's also like really important, to create those boundaries with yourself. And for me also, it's really that moment of constantly reminding myself that I'm never alone, even in the darkest times, that I stand in the shoulders of the thousand that came before me. And so when things are hard for me, this is my mantra of, I didn't just fall out of the sky. There's just so much that, and so many stories that create me in this moment now. And there's also things that my brain cannot even comprehend, universal knowledge that I don't even want to comprehend. So if there's something so greater than me out there, so I'm just like this small speck of light in the midst of things. So I just remind myself of those things, and I think people should find that space of just sitting down and just breathing and just saying, yeah, I'm here. It's sit with that, whatever comes, grief, trauma, joy, happiness, and just learn to sit with that. And as Tasrin said, find your tribe, find your community, and the people that you can call and who allow you to be yourself and to hold your space for you. It's also really important. And I think that's it, really. Taking care of yourself, your space, and your community, and knowing where you come from. And people can get hold of me. We have a website called www.rise.org.
Okay, great.
risecircle.org, sorry. And then also a website with my name, which is Nonty Carity Sabic.com.
Super. And we'll put your website URLs, or anything that you want to drive folks to, that you want to let them know about the resources or service work or anything like that. We'll put that on the Chi page for sure. Gosh, what an honor to be with each of you and really have the opportunities to have this beautiful, deep dialogue and wisdom spring forth from the conversation. I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your very busy lives and, sharing this with the community here. Thank you. Thank you so much.